On June 6, 1944, more than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. They faced gunfire, mines, rough seas, and the daunting task of moving thousands of vehicles, supplies, ammunition, all without a proper port. The Germans had destroyed or heavily fortified the main French harbors. What if the Allies landed and then discovered they had no infrastructure to support the invasion? The risk was enormous. Without deep water ports, victory could stall. Enter one of the most ingenious ideas of World War II, the Mulberry Harbours. These weren't just piers, they were entire floating ports, built in Britain, towed across the Channel, and assembled in days. Today, we'll explore how British engineers built a floating harbor and then realized it could win the invasion. In August 1942, the Allies launched the Dieppe Raid, a daring amphibious assault on the French port of Dieppe. The results were catastrophic. Ships were stranded, men were pinned down, supplies couldn't flow. The port facilities couldn't be captured intact. The lesson was clear. You cannot rely on capturing a major port if there's heavy defense or destruction. For the planned invasion of Normandy, the Allies needed another way. They chose Normandy in part because the Germans expected a landing at Calais, and because the Normandy beaches offered access to the interior. But the beaches lacked deep-water ports. So how would the men, tanks, and supplies keep flowing? A floating harbor, whatever you build and move, was born from necessity. The concept was audacious. Prefabricate sections, tow them across the English Channel, and assemble them off the beach so that ships could unload as though docking at a pier. British engineers, naval planners, and civil contractors embarked on one of the largest temporary construction projects of the war, in secrecy, under time pressure, and with enormous risk. The project was codenamed Mulberry. By mid-1943, teams of civil and military engineers began designing the components: floating concrete caissons, called phoenixes, steel breakwater structures, called bombardons, floating piers, called whales, and pontoons, called beetles. The design had to meet massive requirements: withstand the tides and waves, support tanks and heavy vehicles, be towable across the channel, and be assembled quickly. One document noted, "They must float up and down with the tide. Don't argue the matter." Construction began in yards across Britain in near complete secrecy. Over 45,000 men across more than 300 engineering firms were involved. One of the greatest challenges, the parts had to be built in places where Germans would not detect them, then hidden, then towed out at the right moment. Caissons weighed thousands of tons of concrete and steel. Everything was timed for D-Day and beyond. The scale was staggering. Over 275,000 meters cubed of concrete and 31,000 tons of steel were used. The idea, by June 6, 1944, the first units would be in position so that within days the invasion beaches could be fully supplied, not just by landing craft, but by full-scale cargo vessels docking like at a port. In spring 1944, the enormous journey began. The caissons, pontoons, and other components were floated or towed from British yards down the Thames estuary and across the Channel under cover of darkness and deception. On June 6, 1944, the day of the landings, over 400 towed components, representing about 1.5 million tons of material, began moving south of England towards Normandy. The plan: once the beachhead was secured, the Mulberry parts would be assembled off the coast at two sites, one
Mulberry A at Omaha Beach for the Americans, the other Mulberry B at Arromanches for British and Canadians. It was a race against the tide, waves, enemy action, and time. Everything hinged on whether the harbor could be operational in days, not weeks. At Arromanches, Mulberry B became operational within days. Ships began docking, vehicles rolling off floating roadways into the beach zone. Mulberry A at Omaha Beach, however, faced disaster. A violent storm between 18th and 22nd June 1944 severely damaged it. Caissons shifted, breakwaters torn apart, and it was effectively abandoned. But the British Mulberry at Arromanches endured. In the 10 months after D-Day, it offloaded over 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of material. In 1 week in late July 1944 alone, the harbor handled more than 20,000 tons of material in a single day. What this meant, trucks, tanks, ammunition, and supplies could flow ashore without reliance on smaller landing craft or vulnerable beach unloading. The Allied armies could keep momentum. Engineers, sailors, soldiers, and logisticians worked round the clock. Without the Mulberry, the Allied advance might have bogged down, giving the Germans time to regroup. As the Institution of Civil Engineers states, it shortened the war by increasing the effectiveness of the Allied supply chain. The Mulberry Harbor project stands as one of history's great feats of wartime engineering. It taught lessons far beyond Normandy. Logistics wins wars. Innovation under pressure matters. And infrastructure can be portable. Even today, parts of the Mulberry's concrete caissons lie visible off Arromanches Beach, relics of that immense endeavor. From Dieppe's failure to Normandy's success, the story of Mulberry is one of turning necessity into innovation. Engineers and armies collaborated, norms were broken, and the invasion succeeded not just with bullets and bombs, but with concrete, steel, and floating roads. The floating harbor wasn't just a support structure, it was a strategic weapon. So next time you think of D-Day, think not only of the infantry and paratroopers, but of the floating concrete that stood like a city at sea. The engineers who built the Mulberry Harbors helped turn a gamble into a success. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden marvels of war. Drop a comment. Which innovation in war surprised you most? Was it the floating harbor, the pipeline under the sea, Pluto, or something else entirely? Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the greatest weapon is not a gun, but an idea made real. Until next time, keep exploring history's hidden front lines.